just checking it's sharing okay. Okay, yep, we're all good to go. So want to say hi to everybody and welcome you all to Janet, Skeslien, Charles. So just a little bit about Janet. Sorry, I lost where I am for a minute. So yeah, thanks Janet for joining us. And Janet's the author of The Paris Library, which I've just been recently reading. And yeah, really been enjoying it. It's a great read, and I love, haven't quite finished reading it yet, but I really love the dual timeline of your book. It's really great. And so Janet's the award-winning author of Moonlight in the Odessa and the Paris Library. Her shorter work has appeared in reviews such as Lit Hub and Montana Noir, and she learned about the history of the American Library in Paris while she was working there as the program's manager. And she currently divides her time between Montana and Paris. And I think you're currently in Montana, is that right?
Yes.
So nice and early for you there.
Yes, it's 5:30 in the morning, but my mom and I are both here and we're thrilled to be here.
So thanks so much for joining us, Janet. Would you like to share a little bit more about the Paris Library to everyone?
Well, the Paris Library, I can tell you it's World War II. Paris is occupied. There's a war on words. It's Nazis versus librarians, and the librarians win.
And I think you said you had some things you'd like to share with us, some photos of the original characters and all that. Yes. I'm really interested to know, probably before you do that, how much of your novel is based on true events and true characters?
Well, the Paris Library is the dual timeline, and everything that happens in Paris is true. And so all of the characters who work at the library, with the exception of Odile, are real life characters. So Dorothy Reeder, who is the directress of the library, is a real character. And she stayed, although the American ambassador advised American citizens to leave France in the summer of 1939, and then again in May of 1940, she and her staff stayed at the library. And it was a very international staff. The head librarian at the time was a Russian named Boris Nechayev, and he's a real life character. He was actually shot by the Gestapo, and that is true. There's the Franco-American character, Countess Clara de Chambrun, who took over the library for a time. She was one of the only female trustees, and she was the only trustee to stay. The other trustees returned to the safety of the states. So everything that you read is true. The library protector, the Nazi who inspected the library, is a real life character as well.
And the library, is it still there and still functioning?
It is. It's celebrated its centennial in 2020. If you'd like, I can show you some photos.
Yeah, that would be great. Thanks.
So here, I'll just situate you in Paris a little bit, Jackie. With this blue arrow that you can see, this is where the novel begins. This is where Odile lives. She lives right across from the train station, the Gare Saint-Lazare. And here she talks about seeing the Saint Augustine Church. And here's where the library is. When she has trysts with her boyfriend, Paul, it's in this neighborhood, in apartments in this neighborhood here. Now the American Library in Paris is situated by the Eiffel Tower, over here where you can see my white arrow. And if we follow the Seine River, we can see here's Notre Dame, and then a little bit further we have this little church here, and this is the neighborhood where I live. And here we are inside the American Library in Paris, which is the largest English language lending library on the continent. Has 4,000 members representing 60 countries, and it celebrated its centennial in 2020. its current location, the American Library sits in the shadow of the Eiffel Tower, and this is a photo from my first day as the program's manager.
Mm.
This is the library in 1939, and staff comes from the US, Canada, Russia, France, Switzerland, and England. Our story starts here. The American Library in Paris, this is an information card from the library. And I actually bought the same image from the Chicago Tribune archives when they went up for sale. And you can see the pebbled path, you can see the petunias, you can see the half-dead ivy in the urn. Mm. So this was my inspiration for the character Margaret with the wide brim of her hat, and I wondered what secret she was hiding. But you can see I've stayed very faithful to the library and what it was like then. In August of 1939, war is on the way. The U.S. ambassador advised, in view of the situation prevailing in Europe, it is advisable that American citizens return to the United States. Here, Dorothy Reeder and Evangeline Turnbull prepare for war by putting the important documents and books in the safe. So even though there was that advisory, the Canadian Evangeline Turnbull and the director, American Dorothy, at the helm of the library. In September of 1939, 3 days after war was declared, Miss Reeder created the Soldier Service, and books were shipped to English, French, and Czech soldiers, as well as to the French Foreign Legion. She declared no other thing possesses that mystical faculty to make people see with other people's eyes. The library is a bridge of books between cultures. The library kept pretty meticulous records, so I know that the record for wrapping a care package for a soldier was 1 minute and 40 seconds. And you can see some of these care packages in the baskets below. From September of 1939 to May of 1940, a total of 100,000 books were shipped to soldiers. Here we have the occupation when the Nazis have arrived in Paris. And here we have my favorite photo of all, Miss Reeder. Dorothy Reeder worked at the Library of Congress, our national library, before moving to France in 1929 on her own. In June 12, 1940, just before the Nazis invaded Paris, Miss Reeder sent her staff away for their own safety, but she remained at her post. The directress dealt with Dr. Fuchs, the Nazi library protector. The Nazis had pillaged the Russian and Polish libraries in Paris. Certain people may not enter, he stated, Jewish people. Miss Reeder and her colleagues delivered books to Jewish members. Here's another photo of her that I like at her desk. I love the big black phone. And you can see on the wall the picture of Washington, D.C., where she lived before she came to Paris. This is a photo of the Countess Claire de Chambrun. In 1920, she was one of the original trustees along with the writer Edith Wharton. And during World War II, she was the only trustee to remain in Paris. She too was summoned to the office of the Nazi library protector. The library had been denounced because it contained anti-German cartoons, political cartoons, and journals. This is another photo that I like, and it is near the Luxembourg Garden. Claire de Chambrun earned a PhD from the Sorbonne at the age of 48, and she was a Shakespeare scholar as well as a novelist. She also translated Shakespeare's work into French, and you can read about her war experiences in her memoir, Shadows Lengthen. This is Boris, and you can see the photo that I showed you earlier. You can see that this is the same backdrop at the American Library in Paris. In 1925, Boris Nechayev started at the library as a page, and he worked his way up to head librarian. He was originally from Russia and spoke several languages. During the occupation, Boris was shot and taken prisoner. He survived and worked at the library until he retired. I spoke to his daughter, Hélène, who was in his arms there. She's now in her 80s. I was thrilled to interview her for the book, and she said her father smoked Jeton cigarettes, and even after being shot through the lung, he never quit smoking his beloved cigarettes. He was really an incredible character as well. So here we have a staff photo. It was taken by Harcourt, which is usually for movie stars like Gérard Depardieu or Catherine Deneuve. With the arrow, we have the Dorothy Reeder, the director. Here we have Boris. And here we have a Canadian mother-daughter team of librarians. In the front, we have Evangeline Kernbull and her daughter, Olivia, is in the back row. Evangeline's husband, she married her husband in 1915, and then he shipped off to war in France, and he was killed on the battlefield in France. His daughter was born a few months later, and then they too were in France during the World War. So this is really an incredible family that all three family members were in France during a World War in giving service. Here we have the library love story, Helen Fickweiler and Peter Ustinov. When they returned to the States, they got married, and I got the chance to correspond with their daughter and granddaughter, which was really fun to be able to do. Here we have the library book plate. So when you check out a book from the library, it will have this image from the darkness of war, the light of books. And I love how the book is opened like the horizon. And I love how the books are vanquishing the sword and the rifle. And here we have the book again with a card to check it out.
Thanks so much for sharing that. That's amazing, seeing all those photos, and especially like seeing as I've read the book, seeing the photos behind the book as well. That's really, really great. It looks like there was a lot documented about the people working there. Is that what you found?
Yes, there were a lot of documents. I read thousands of pages of documents and a lot of letters to the American Library Association back in the States. There was a 15-page report that she wrote, marked confidential, about her time right before the Nazis arrived and then during the occupation. And I have that on my website. It gave me chills when I read it, and it really made me want to write the book.
Yeah.
So I was really lucky to have all that documentation.
And was there anything that you like found really hard, or you weren't able to find out that you wished you had been able to?
Well, there was in the photo I just showed you, there was kind of a mystery woman, and we only recently, she was a librarian named Jeanette Etlinger, and we didn't know what happened to her. And it's only in the last months that we did find out she was Jewish and she was taken prisoner to Baden-Baden, Germany. And her husband was an English journalist, so she was held in a camp for journalists and diplomats. And the first thing that she did was she started a library.
In the camp.
And so that was really incredible. So it's too bad that we were all worried about her because we knew she was Jewish and she just seemed like she disappeared. And so we were reassured at the library to know that she was all right. She returned to the States. And there was an article written about her later, and interviewed the prisoners that were with her, and all the prisoners said the same thing. It was the library that got them through.
Oh, wow. And we've got quite a few people watching, which is great. So just reminding people watching, if you have any questions, please type them in comments. I've got quite a few people who have said that they've read the Paris Library and that they've absolutely loved the storyline.
Oh, good. I'm glad to hear it. Thank you for reading it.
So I'm interested to know, have you always wanted to be a writer?
Yes, I knew when I was 12 years old that I was already a writer.
And how hard or easy was it for you to have that first book published?
Well, the first book wasn't that hard to get published. It was called Moonlight in Odessa, and it's about the booming business of email order brides. It was based on my experience. I lived in Odessa, Ukraine for 2 years, and two of my really good friends married total strangers, one in Western Europe and then one in the United States, to escape to poverty. And so I went to a writing conference in Geneva, which is only 3 hours away from Paris, where I live. It was a very inexpensive conference, and there was an agent there. And so that was how I got my first agent. However, she did not want to go out with this book. And I'd written 2 books, and she just didn't want to go out with them. So for this book, it took me 75 query letters to find a new agent. So yes, sometimes the process is fast, and sometimes it's slow. So over
Mm,
several years and 75 query letters. So
mm,
this book did take time to get published.
mm. So did you, after like doing 75, was there any time that you thought you might give up?
Well, you know that photo of Dorothy Reader standing on the chair? I had that book. I had that photo on my desk, and then I had a card from my mom and my sister. So anytime I felt like giving up, I would just look at those and think, oh, I
I
can send
need to
out a
keep,
few more.
yeah.
So
And could you tell us what you like reading yourself, and maybe if there's anything you've been reading lately that you'd like to recommend to us?
this book I think is coming out in the fall, and it's called Once Upon a Wardrobe
Mm,
by Patty Callahan. And it's about the imagined life of C.S. Lewis. And a young woman goes to ask him questions about Narnia. And so we learn a lot about his background and the things that happened in his life that maybe inspired the writing of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe.
mm,
And as a writer, it just really spoke to me about where stories come from and what writers go through. And it's just a beautifully written novel.
mm, mm. Thanks for that recommendation. Jill's wondering if you have a favourite genre to read.
Mm, I love everything. I love fiction. I love nonfiction. I love literary fiction. I love commercial fiction. I love mysteries. Right now I'm reading a book set in the Caribbean. It's a mystery,
Mm,
and I really it was snowing in Montana this last week, so it was very nice to be on the beaches of the
to
Caribbean.
think, yeah. Mm, mhm. And the Paris Library, how long did that take you to do all your research and to write the novel?
It took about 10 years, I would say. I worked at the library, so but I was so busy when I was working at the library that I actually didn't have any time to research when I was there. And so when I was no longer working at the library, I would cross the river to France's National Library. And so I would read things like the Paris edition of the New York Herald, Le Figaro. There's a magazine called Library Journal that exists today. And so I
Mm,
read maybe 2 years of back issues in 1939 and 1940 to find out what issues librarians were worried about.
mm,
For example, in the book, there's a woman who's worried about germs. And I read an article about germs. People were
mm,
worried about transmitting germs in books
mm,
even back then. So it was really fun to read about librarians.
mm. That's interesting, yeah. And are you writing something new at the moment?
Yes, I'm always writing something, but I don't really like to talk about my projects when they're not concrete.
Mm. Uh, what's your other novel? Was that a historical fiction as well?
Well, it's set in 1994, so when I was writing,
Okay.
it wasn't historical
Mm.
fiction, but now it's 25 years ago already, so the time does go by super
Yeah,
fast.
yeah.
Yes,
So,
yes, and I think it really does show. It's very similar to the Paris Library. It's really about a woman's journey and how we women have to reinvent ourselves at different
mm,
times in our lives,
mm,
and the people who help her hinder us. So the themes are very similar. And I guess I would call it historical fiction in that it shows a specific time and place, just right after the end of Perestroika when the country's still in chaos.
yeah, yeah. Mary said that it's interesting what you said about germs in the libraries, and she's got a friend who's very worried about it, so only gets e-books from the library.
Yes, yes.
Mm,
Well, I mean, it really was interesting to read those articles in Library Journal. And another one that I remember was about customer service. So the librarians went to a fancy department store in Los Angeles to get tips on how to have better customer service. So I thought that
yeah,
was really interesting, the things
mm,
that the librarians did to make the library more welcoming.
yeah. It is very interesting, yeah. And do you have a favourite place to do your writing?
Gosh, with the pandemic, I'm afraid I did a lot of writing in my office because everything was closed in
Mm,
Paris. I think the restaurants closed in November, and then they just recently within the last week opened up. So just a lot for just practical reasons, we basically had to stay home during that time. but it's always fun to go to a cafe and people watch. And
Mm,
yes, that's always fun to do.
so that's what you used to do before?
Well, not as much as I used to, because in Paris, when I first arrived there were no televisions in cafes. And now with the flat screen TVs, you see a lot of flat screen TVs, or you see a lot of music that is super loud. It used to be there would
Oh,
be a
okay.
speaker in one corner of the cafe or restaurant, but now they have, the kind of, they just, you can't really escape the music.
Mm,
So, I
mm,
need a little quiet, so it's hard for
yeah.
me to concentrate.
Mm,
So I do go to libraries a lot for that.
mm, yeah. Mary's wondering if you have a writer who inspires your writing.
Well, my mom went to school with James Grady, who wrote the 6 Days of the Condor. 6 Days of the Condor. It became a movie
Mm,
with Faye Dunaway and Robert Redford. 3 Days of the Condor, and so he's from my hometown, and so I knew it was possible to become a writer because he had done it. So that
yeah.
was Jim Grady. And I think my favorite writer is Anne Patchett and her book Bel Canto. It's really a beautiful book about disparate people coming together under stressful
Mm,
situations and finding out they have a lot more in common than they thought. I love that book. And then her most recent book is The Dutch House. And
oh,
I
yes,
wanted to
yeah.
be in a book club. I called all of my
Mm,
book club friends and said, what happened at the end? I'm just
mm,
crazy. So I love it when a book, when you just have to talk about it with someone. That's, I think,
mm,
the mark of a good book.
mm. And Jill's wondering how many hours a day you would write.
I usually try to write in the morning from 8 until 12, and then do research in the afternoon and evening.
And do you have another job as well, or are you a full-time writer now?
Since 2019, since the summer of 2019, I've taken some time off to do a little more research for one of my projects.
Mm,
But I've always been a teacher. So the last job I had, I was teaching engineers. One of the classes I taught was Paris, so we looked at Paris through the lens of literature, photography, art, statistics, and that was really a fun class to teach. And then I taught creative writing.
mm, mm. And could you tell us, oh, sorry, I lost. Do you read your reviews?
It's hard for me to read reviews because a lot of them are really nice, but then there will be one that'll just really be mean.
Mm,
And those are the ones I remember. So I
yeah.
actually try to stay away from reviews because it just is kind of like you're going along and then
Mm,
so
mhm,
and it's really sad. I can remember every single bad review that I read, so
yeah.
it's a pity. Because
Mm,
there are, what I do like is Instagram. I'm probably the last person on the planet to get onto Instagram, and I really like the beautiful posts on Instagram that people write. They're just really beautiful, and I
yeah.
appreciate the photos and the time that people take to write about their favorite books.
Mm, yeah. And do you have the time if a reader reaches out to you to be able to reply back to them?
Oh, I always do. I always do. I do feel bad that there was a glitch with my website, and so which should transfer the emails
Mm,
from the readers to me. And so for a month, and I didn't realize that there was a glitch, and
oh,
so
no.
I just felt terrible about that because I do love hearing from readers. It's
Mm,
really wonderful.
mm. And how have you found promoting Paris Library during when there's been lockdown times and
Well, it's been really lucky to have Zoom. We're really lucky to have this technology. So I
mm,
guess the pandemic came at least at a time when we could communicate with the outside world, which has
mm,
really been wonderful. It's amazing that we're sitting here at 6 in the morning, um, being able to talk to you at 9:30, 10 o'clock at night,
mm,
in Australia. What a gift to have.
yeah,
I think I went to a lot of smaller libraries in England, for example, that I wouldn't have been able to physically travel to. So I think it's really nice to be able to get out to places I wouldn't necessarily be able to go otherwise. I
yeah,
certainly wouldn't have been able to go to Australia, so I feel very
mm,
lucky to be with you today, Jackie.
yeah, and that's one great advantage for us as well. I think that we've been able to speak to a lot more authors than we may not have been able to otherwise. Could you tell me, for you, what do you think makes a good story?
Well, when we're talking about book clubs, I think it's easier to talk about a book when people violently disagree.
Mm,
And so I think if there's something in the book that can get people to disagree, for example, in my book, did Odile do the right thing in leaving, or was Margaret a little callous? If we can disagree a little bit about the characters, I think that makes for a rich discussion. It's really hard if everybody loves the book, then the discussion only lasts 15 minutes. You say, oh, it's
yeah.
a great book, I loved it so much. It's better if you could kind of have a knockdown, drag out fight about the characters or the situation.
Mm,
With the Dutch House, at the end, when I didn't understand what happened, it really compelled me to reach out to other readers, and I think
yeah.
that's really wonderful.
Yeah, that's a good point to say that. Yeah. Yeah. And just want to share the cover again of the Paris Library. So I think it's a really beautiful cover. I don't think, oh, yeah, there we can see the setting there. Do you have any input in your cover?
The editor was really nice. She sent us photos to find out about what kind of clothing we'd want the character to wear and things
Okay.
like that.
Mm,
So it was really, yes, they were really thoughtful about it. Really lovely.
mm. And do you have different covers in different countries?
Yes, I have a lot of different covers, and it's really interesting to see what speaks to different people in different
Mm,
countries. I love seeing different covers like that. A lot of the books have the woman facing the turning around, just like the photo that you showed. But I think in Czechoslovakia, the woman is looking
it's
at,
fast.
or in Czech
Okay.
Republic, the woman is looking right at the camera, so it's a little
Mm.
different. So yes, it's very interesting to see those
Yeah, I find
photos.
it really interesting seeing the different covers for different countries because some of them are completely different as well.
Yes. Well,
Mm.
even the difference between the US and Australia or England can be very interesting too.
Mm.
It's very
Mm.
interesting to see what speaks to other places.
Yeah, yeah. And if people want to keep in touch with you, can you tell them how they can follow you?
Yes, I'm on Twitter, I'm on Instagram, I have an author page on Facebook. On my website, there are some wonderful photos of the real life characters. For book clubs, there's a book club kit that is downloadable,
Oh, great.
and it's on my website as well. There's my email address, so people can always send an email or send a message through Instagram or
Hmm.
Facebook. I'm always happy to hear from
Yeah,
readers.
yeah. Thanks for that. And thanks so much for joining us. It's been great chatting to you, and thanks for getting up early to talk to us. And I really, really loved seeing the photos and hearing a little bit more about the characters behind the Paris Library. That was great. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Jackie, so much for inviting me. Enjoy the
Thanks.
rest of your evening. Thank you.
Yep. Have a
Bye
good
bye.
day. Bye.